Thank you for that very warm introduction. Thanks to all of you for getting up early and sharing your precious time together this morning. I must say it's been very heartening to be on the beat of writing about local economies for 15 years. I had a book published in the mid-90s called Going Local, and I started on the speaking circuit at the University of Kentucky. When I showed up, 2 people were there. 1 left early. And it's kind of a testament that, what was such a way out discourse 15 years ago has become a little bit more front and center. So I think all of us can congratulate one another on having moved this issue into the focus of attention that it deserves. Now let me ask a question. How many people here have all the money they need for the food initiatives they're working on? Good. So this conversation will be relevant because what I have to say, what Elizabeth, you will have to say after me, what various other people will be talking about who have initiatives to share in the state, will hopefully give you some real ideas about how to move capital into your very important businesses. Where I want to start is just a little bit of kind of intellectual throat clearing about why local businesses matter and local businesses need financial support. This is a very famous study that was done in Austin, Texas about 10 years ago, looking at the impact of a $100 spent at a Borders bookstore chain, non-local, recently bankrupt. Comparing that to $100 spent at a local bookstore. $100 spent at the Borders leaves $13 in the local economy. $100 spent at the local bookstore leaves $45. And the reason for the difference is very simple. The locally owned business spends more of its money locally. That is, in the case of book people, they have a high-level management team on the ground that Borders does not. They spend money on local lawyers and accountants for their business. The Borders didn't. They spend money on local advertising on radio and TV. The Borders does not. They have a stream of profits coming into the community. And if you generalize from this, it would really be unusual if you had 2 businesses, very similar, one local, one non-local, where the non-local business would generate what economists call a higher economic multiplier. And in point of fact, we have about 24 studies that have been done since the Austin study, half in the United States, half international. And they basically show that the economic impact, whether it is jobs, income, taxes, charitable contributions, is 2 to 4 times for every dollar spent in a locally owned business. And significantly, there is not a single study that has shown otherwise. Don't take my word for it. The Harvard Business Review 2 summers ago had this nice piece in it. The title reads, "More small firms means more small jobs." And it's a regression analysis of 200 metro areas in the United States, showing that per capita job growth is correlated with the presence of local and small business. And another study done from Penn State 6 months after that found that per capita income growth is also correlated with the presence of local and small business. There's actually a huge mountain of evidence about the importance of locally owned businesses that we really don't have time to go through. We know that locally owned businesses are critical to creating walkable communities because you need smaller, increasingly home-based businesses to situate residences and schools and shopping areas close together. We know that local businesses are key for promoting tourism because tourists love what's unique about a place. We know that locally owned businesses promote entrepreneurship and are an investment in the long-term vitality of the community. There is a sociology literature that shows that social equality is associated with the presence of local businesses, and a political science literature that shows that people's probability of voting and volunteering is associated with the presence of locally owned businesses. So it is a very profound list of advantages that we have from local businesses. From these advantages, I have been working on a kind of alternative, simple template for local economic development. And I kind of boil it down to 6 Ps: planning, people, partners, purchasing, and policy making. Planning means identifying leaks in your economy. Where are all of the places where you are unnecessarily buying outside goods and services? Because those are the opportunities for launching new local businesses to meet local needs. People, how do we find the great entrepreneurs for these new leak-plugging businesses? Partners, how do we build networks of local businesses so they are more competitive working together than they would be working apart? Purse, local investment, we'll of course come back to that. Purchasing, how do we spearhead local first or 10% shift campaigns? And policy making, how do we remove all of the biases in law and in public policy that are tilted against local business right now? And in my view, the biggest tilt against in public policy against local business is dumb economic development programs, which, if you've read the New York Times series starting from Sunday, you know dominates the economic development culture today. The culture of attract and retain, which means disdain for local businesses. As I talk with business groups around the country, what I find is the single biggest issue, the single biggest challenge that businesses face is capital. How do we harness our savings, both short-term savings in banks, long-term savings in pension funds, and put that into local businesses? By show of hands, how many people were not here last night? Okay, so a fair number of you. So I'll just explain a little exercise that I did last night rather than go through it, which is that I asked people, how many of you do your banking at a local bank or a credit union? All of the hands went up. And then I asked, those of you with pension funds, how many of you have your pension funds in locally owned businesses? All of the hands went down. Well, there were 3 hands that stayed up, and they may have been wrong. And this is really pretty shocking, okay? Because, look, all of us are working our hearts out for local businesses, and yet where are we putting our money? We're putting our money in the Fortune 500 economy that we know is not in our interest. So that's why I had the picture of the backwards gun here, because we literally are shooting ourselves in our heads by not putting our money in the right things. If we were to put our money in the right things, the long-term savings that Americans have total $30 trillion. That is double the annual gross domestic product. That includes stocks, bonds, mutual funds, pension funds, and insurance funds. Now, $30 trillion is currently invested about 99.9% in either government bonds or Fortune 500 securities. There is barely a penny of this money that goes into the half of the economy that is small business and locally owned. And that is a terrible market failure. If we could fix this market failure, in principle, $15 trillion would move from the Wall Street economy to the Main Street economy. That is, half of that money belongs in the half of the economy that is thriving, competitive, and is responsible for community well-being right now. $15 trillion works out to $50,000 for every man, woman, and child living in our communities. So if you're in a community of, say, 1,000 people, that's $50 million more you have available for your local businesses. 10,000 people, well, that's $500 million. You can work out the math from there. But it's serious money that we're talking about. And we don't have to transfer all of this money. Last night I kind of went through a study that Leslie Schauer and I did with Brad Massey on what we called the 25% shift in Cleveland. We talked about how a 25% shift toward local food would create 27,000 jobs. And we put forward the idea that it would cost about, $735 million of capital in order to make this 25% shift. Well, that sounds like a lot of money, but if you look at the 16-county area, it in fact is about 1% of the money that's in banks, and it's 1/4% of the money that is in pension funds. So we only have to do a little bit of shifting right now to make a huge difference in the local food economy. The problem that we have, and the reason for our capital market failure right now, is securities laws that we enacted in the early Jurassic period. We created a system of investment apartheid. Basically, if you're in the top 1% of wealth, if you're this guy, $200,000, $300,000 of income a year, $1 million of wealth excluding your house, then you can invest in anything, anytime, no questions asked. If you're in the other 99%, you cannot take a penny of investment from an unaccredited, you cannot put a penny into a business unless there is a massive act of disclosure, often accompanied by lawyers and accountants, legal filings. And these disclosures, amount to thick books, often in 8-point font, that no human being has ever been observed to read. And if you read through them, every single page says you will lose everything. You will lose everything. So these are just ridiculous statements that live on lawyers' hard drives that bear no relationship to actual disclosure of real-world information around these businesses. We got to change this. And a lot of what I have tried to do in my book is identify pathways by which the 99% can reconnect with the half of the economy that is small, locally owned business. So I want to quickly run through about 16 different tools that you can use at the local level to tap into unaccredited investors. So number one, moving your money. If anyone here could not raise their hand to the question, do you bank at a local bank or credit union? This message is for you. And that is, we know that local banks and credit unions put a disproportionate amount of their money into local small business. So small banks and mid-sized banks are responsible for 22% of the assets right now of American banking. And yet, they are responsible for more than half of all the small business lending that occurs right now. So that they are the places where small business lending occurs. And it's the main reason why we should be moving our money if necessary. Now, it turns out that all banks, local and non-local, are still very stingy about their lending. So some people have approached their local bank to create specialized certificates of deposit, the proceeds of which are then used to support targeted local businesses. So an example is Equal Exchange. Equal Exchange is a fair trade group based in Boston. They approached their local bank, Wainwright, since renamed Eastern, And they said, let's create a special certificate of deposit, the proceeds of which only support equal exchange. And the bank thought, what a great idea. We'll advertise that we are the one bank in the country that has, special deposits just for fair trade. $1 million of deposits have come into this account. And now Equal Exchange has a $1 million line of credit. So I would suggest to groups throughout Virginia, approach your local banks and create specialty kinds of food certificates of deposit to help banking unaccredited investors to put money into your businesses. Number 3, co-ops. Co-op laws are not entirely exempt from old-style securities laws, but the laws around co-ops are largely defined at the state level, and they're largely looser than those around other for-profit businesses. So people have used co-ops as a way of investing for many years. So an example is the Weaver Street Market in Carborough, North Carolina, which I talked a little bit about last night. They needed to build a new store. They needed $1 million of equity in order to build it. So they got that money from their members. And the members put forward the money, and actually they borrowed it from their members and paid the members back between 5 and 8% per year for the privilege of having that money. So it turns out that if you're part of one of these co-op building schemes, it's a very lucrative kind of an investment. Another kind of co-op investment can be found in New Mexico, where the La Montanita Food Co-op, which has 5 co-ops spread across the state, created a $100,000 revolving loan fund to support small farmers and local food businesses that sell their goods into the grocery stores. And this actually, they were able to capitalize this fund in 4 months. They want to now grow this to several $1 million. Still another example of co-op investment is Co-op Power in Western Massachusetts. Co-op Power is a local energy co-op. And here's an interesting thing. Suppose you wanted to create an investment co-op where the co-op would just take all the members' money and invest in other local businesses. Could you do that? No, because this is a violation of the Investment Company Act. But every company has to invest some money in other companies, and the magic number is 40%. As long as you stay under 40%, you're not considered an investment company. So Co-op Power puts about 40% of their capital into all kinds of other local energy businesses, on biofuels, wood chips, solar power installation, energy efficiency equipment. Not all these businesses are co-ops, but they have become one of the most important investment leaders in alternative energy in Western Massachusetts. Number 4, LION. LION stands for the Local Investment Opportunities Network of Port Townsend, Washington, a town of about 10,000 people. This guy is the starter of LION. James Fraser, former hedge fund manager, felt very guilty about what he did early in his career, came back to his hometown to do something better. He was interested in one wrinkle of securities law, which is that even after you go through all this disclosure exercise that might cost you $25,000, $50,000, $100,000, you still only can talk to people you know. People you have a pre-existing relationship with. So Fraser had an idea. He would put together a party once a month, ply the people with good food and alcohol, bring in the business people and the investors, and then at the end of the party he would send around a little list. Who do you now have a pre-existing relationship with? And based on that, he would then start getting business plans and circulate them to the folks with those pre-existing relationships. Just this one social innovation since 2008, that is since the financial crisis, has put $3 million of additional capital into the hands of local businesses in this 10,000 person town. Number 5, sponsorship sites. You probably have seen or heard about Kickstarter and Indiegogo. These are basically dodges around securities laws. This particular offering is for the Brookside Brewery, Copper Harbor, Michigan's first microbrewery. If you donate $1, you get a thank you note. If you donate $25, you get a t-shirt. If you donate a couple $1,000, maybe they'll name the beer after you. From the standpoint of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the thank you note t-shirt and the beer name do not constitute a rate of return. So this is not considered a security. Totally legal. Now, you're wondering, who would possibly throw money at something for nothing? And the answer last year in Kickstarter was something north of $140 million. And they are exceeding those numbers this year. There is peer-to-peer lending that is occurring via the internet in 2 flavors, the nonprofit flavor, Kiva, and the for-profit flavor, Prosper, or the Lending Club. Now, Kiva, because they only pay back principal, is not considered a security in most US states. So that's another interesting dodge around securities laws. Kiva is basically the internet version of the Grameen Bank. It's sort of the electronic Muhammad Yunus. They find small entrepreneurs, say in Bolivia, and you can put in $100, $200 loans into these micro-entrepreneurs, and then they pay you back your principal. Prosper does give you interest, and it is a security. But it's there, and so if you're a business looking for capital, this may be a place that you go to. Now I have to say, my problem with Prosper and Kiva, and frankly even Kickstarter and Indiegogo, is that every $100 you put into a micro-entrepreneur in Bolivia is $100 unavailable for a micro-entrepreneur in, say, Roanoke. So we've got to figure out how to use these sites and use these kinds of technologies for truly local investment. So an example of where this is being done is the Funding Circle in the United Kingdom actually has created community circles that brings businesses and communities together locally. But we're also seeing nationally a proliferation of mostly donation sites. Some may actually start to get into the Kiva model that are community focused as well, with names like Community Funded, Lucky Ant, The Money Crowd, Small Knot. I'm guessing that by the end of this year there'll be 50 or 100 of these sites out there. Number 7, slow munis. Last night, when I talked about the work we were doing in Cleveland, one thing I did not share was that our ultimate recommendation to the Cleveland region was to create what you might call food bonds. That is, that they should use municipal bonding capacity to raise capital that then would collateralize loans to priority local food businesses that would come from existing local banks or credit unions. Now, I have all these Colorado and Boulder kinds of food things here because we made a similar recommendation to Boulder County that they also create these food bonds. The term slow munis is really a very nice term for this concept given by the group Slow Money, which came out of course, Slow Food. And slow munis, I think the concept of slow munis is very simple. Municipalities have been using their bonding capacity to support really dumb economic development for decades. All kinds of corporate attractions, all kinds of big, dumb economic development parks, why not finally use this bonding capacity, this cheap access to capital, to support the local food businesses we know are so important? Number 8, pre-selling. Pre-selling in most US states is also not a security. So an example of pre-selling is the Awaken Cafe in Oakland, California needed to raise $100,000 to move the cafe to another location. They didn't want to waste $100,000 on attorneys, so they decided to pre-sell coffee. Plunk down $1,000 today and you'll get $1,200 of coffee at the new cafe when we open up. They got nearly all of the money they needed just with this one clever pre-sale technique. Number 9, now we get into interesting stuff. Local stock. In every state in the United States, there has long been the option to issue stock intrastate that can only, say within Virginia, this could be stock that could only be bought and traded by residents of Virginia. In a sense, it's a form of going public but keeping ownership local. An example is in Mount Ayr, Iowa. That's where this picture is from downtown Mount Ayr, Iowa. It's a town of 1,500 people. They decided about 15 years ago to create a community grocery store. And the proprietor issued local stock. He got legal assistance for free. So he didn't have to pony up the usual $50,000 to $100,000. People bought the shares, about 350 people. This stock, over the 15 years, has paid a dividend over 5% per year to the holders of that stock, which is pretty darn good. Now, I have to say that the more that I thought about the law around small stock, the more it really, really annoyed me that the only way a proprietor like this could do it was either to find a lot of money to pay off an attorney, or you know, the very unusual case of finding an attorney willing to give away the work for free. And here was the part that was really annoying. The whole concept of securities law is built on the premise that we want to protect grandma from buying swampland in Florida from some kind of fraudulent securities dealing. A totally decent objective. And yet, today in the United States, grandma can walk into one of 1,000 casinos. And when grandma walks into the casino, do they say, stop for a second, please establish that you are an accredited gambler? Never happens. Before grandma sits down and plays blackjack, do we say, can you please read this thick disclosure statement on the risks of blackjack and sign? We don't do that. So we have two systems of risk management in this country. One system called gambling, where you can lose everything for nothing and probably will, independent of your income. And another system called investing in community well-being through local businesses, where we say, unless you pay off lawyers $100,000 for useless disclosure statements, you can't play. This makes no sense. So I wrote a piece, a little bit mischievously, for a journal of the Federal Reserve a few years back, suggesting a $100 exemption, a $100 holiday, that we just allow anyone to put $100 into any business, no questions asked, no legal paperwork whatsoever. The rationale is, of course, that $100 is really no more risky than a dinner for two at a new Chinese restaurant, right? And so we're not requiring the Chinese restaurant to do $100,000 of disclosure statements before they open their doors. So to me, it seemed like a no-brainer. Well, my friends at Cutting Edge Capital actually submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission a formal rulemaking petition around this idea. Hundreds of people wrote in letters. And what did the SEC do with it? Nothing. Last year, I guess it was around 15 months ago, the Congressional Operation, the Government Operations Committee in the House had Mary Shapiro, head of the SEC, in front of the committee and said, whatever became of that proposal for the $100 exemption? And she said, well, you know, we're kind of sort of going to look at this and other proposals for reform in a few months. We may gather some people inside the SEC to think about it. This is 3 years after it's been submitted. The committee went ballistic. The committee went ballistic because we're in a national emergency. At that point, national unemployment was 9%. And they're saying we'll kind of take our time about getting capital in a risk-free way into the most important job producers in the United States. The committee voted unanimously. Occupy Democrats and Tea Party Republicans, arm in arm, voted unanimously, not for a $100 exemption, but for a $10,000 exemption. Well, this then moved to the Senate, languished for a few months, and finally this guy said, get it done. And the Senate finally passed the Jobs Act. President Obama signed it, and this is a picture that I and Jenny Casson took from the Rose Garden, where about 300 of us were sitting when he signed it. And the result of the Jobs Act, after the SEC goes through all the rulemaking, which could last another year, the result is that local investment is now legal. And I have to say that having been associated with every conceivable losing cause in my lifetime, to finally have one victory felt very sweet. So, starting in around 2014, we're going to see a proliferation of small stock issues happening on websites around the country. But people are going to want to sell those shares. And so the next thing that we're going to be thinking about is creating local stock exchanges. And this guy, Michael Van Patten of Mission Markets in New York, is prepared to create a local or statewide portal for you to facilitate the sale and resale of local securities, and it probably will cost you about $10,000 to get it up and running. So the era of moving away from Wall Street into local stock exchanges is about to happen. Now the guy on the right, Trexler Profit, thinks that Mission Markets is too expensive. He has an alternative low-cost platform he's trying to develop in Pennsylvania called the LANX, the Lancaster Stock Exchange. His name, by the way, is Trexler Profit. Now, no one should take what I have said as an invitation to put all of your money into your one favorite farm or your one favorite local business. Because it's not smart investment not to have a diversified portfolio. So you're thinking, okay, I'll just find a mutual fund where I can put my money into a bunch of local businesses. In fact, there are 7,500 mutual funds in the United States that unaccredited investors can put their money into, and not a single one puts a penny into local small business. Not because it's disallowed by the law, but just because they haven't been interested in it up to now. But it turns out that we could create a local mutual fund by having 85% in local municipal bonds right now. Those are really liquid, and that's the requirement. And 15% in less liquid local stocks or local debt notes. What about going to your pension funds, if you have a public pension fund or some other big pension fund? How about getting them to invest locally? Well, they will tell you, sorry, The federal law of ERISA, I won't even tell you what that stands for, says we can only invest in fiduciarily responsible companies like Fortune 500 companies. And you say, excuse me, Enron is a fiduciarily responsible company? And so you're going to have an argument with them. But the point is that you can start to lobby with them to shift, but very few public pension funds have put more than a few trivial dollars into local businesses. So instead, what we are seeing is an exemption that exists within the Investment Company Act for non-profit small investment funds that support, usually through small loans, mostly disadvantaged local businesses. So this guy, Steve Fireman, in Columbus, Ohio, runs the Economic and Community Development Institute. They have 14 revolving loan funds, and they recently got permission from the Ohio Securities Department for the 14th fund to accept unaccredited investors that can, finally put some money in a diversified pool. Another approach that people have taken, in the absence of real institutional options, is they've created their own investment clubs. So No Small Potatoes, which is an offshoot of Slow Money in Maine, created a 20-person investment club. They each put in $5,000 to $10,000, and they have given small loans to farmers and small food businesses. The key thing about an investment club that differentiates it from an investment company is that all of the members have to be involved in all of the decisions. So the moment I say in my investment club, Elizabeth, you can make my decision for me, and we cease to exist. But if all of us are involved in that decision making, we're good. In the meantime, the secret weapon for local investing, so secret that a dummy's book has been written about it, is the self-directed IRA. Because with the self-directed IRA, you can roll over your tax-deferred IRA money already, which is currently invested in the 7,500 non-local mutual funds, and move that money into everything we just talked about. You could put that money into targeted CDs in your bank. You could put that money into a co-op loan. You could put that money into small stock. You could put that money in Steve Fireman's fund. You could put that money in a Kiva or a Prosper investment. The only thing you can't put your money in is your own house or your kid's house. But interestingly, you can put your money in your neighbor's house. And your neighbor can put his or her pension money into your house. And therein lies my talk for next year. Finally, if you're thinking about what is really easy, low-hanging fruit that you could do as a community to get this local investment revolution started, here's one thing. You go online to Yahoo Finance, and you can pull down, NASDAQ statistics, a million statistics about all kinds of investments. Now, Yahoo Finance is not in the business of finance. They're like a newspaper. They're providing information. So you could create a website that simply lists all of the local investment opportunities in your area. And if you just do that, and I say go to a local guardian, custodian of a self-directed IRA and say, look, if I bring you 1,000 new clients, will you reduce your rates to $100 a year? And I am sure I can find a bunch of accountants that will say yes to that. So that combination of having a self-directed IRA option in your community and a list of all the places you can put that money, just those two things will move millions of dollars in your community into local food businesses over the next few years. Now, what about the rate of return? If you have a loser social life like I have, where you travel around the country all the time, you come back on a Saturday and you do your laundry all day. And you're stuck listening to AM radio, to Rick Edelman telling you all his great investment advice. And you will hear that if you leave your investment long-term in Wall Street, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you will get 8% per year, no 12%, no 20%. Who knows? All of these numbers are made up. Because if you look at the historic performance of Wall Street over 140 years, add in dividends, take out inflation, the average return in a 12-month period is 2.6%. Everything else is BS. It is 2.6%. Now, frankly, a lot of the things that we just talked about beat 2.6%. Equal Exchange has a class of investors that get 5% per year. Community Grocers in Mount Ayr, Iowa, dividends of more than 5% per year. Weaver Street Market, 5 to 8% per year. I'm not saying that every local investment beats every Wall Street investment, but I'm saying that anything that exists is possible. And if we start developing some sophistication around local investment, it can become the better paying alternative, plus all the triple bottom line returns to our community that we just started out talking about. Now I want to reflect in the last couple of minutes on another wrinkle in local investment, and that is, you know, really many of us sitting in this audience right now are individual proprietors who are thinking about our own financial universes. And many of us also work with individual investors out there and try to get them to invest more wisely in their community. And the truth is that, you know, a lot of us are trying to think big picture, trying to think, how can we make ends meet in a very difficult period? And so one of the exercises that I go through in my book is I say, okay, suppose in order to beat Wall Street, we strive for a 5% rate of return with tax-deferred money. If you look at that in non-tax-deferred terms, it's really, you've got to achieve about 7%. And if you're talking about what you might call a wasting asset investment, you have to achieve, in order to beat Wall Street, 16%. I'm not going to go through these numbers now. If you're interested in it, it's explained in the book. A wasting asset would be, say, investing in energy efficiency. If I put $1,000 into energy efficiency, it's not clear it will raise the value of my house by $1,000. So conservatively, I'll assume it won't raise the value of my house at all. But in order for this thing to pay off, you know, rather than, you know, 30 years of holding a stock, this thing really has to pay for itself and then some in, say, 10 years. And that's why I look at a 10-year window for this. So are there local investments that can beat these goals? And the answer is, yeah, no problem. How can I beat 7% without tax-deferred money? In other words, if I have $5,000, do I put that money in my IRA, or do I put that money into something else? And the answer is always something else makes more sense from a local investment standpoint and from your own standpoint. Simply creating your own little bank account in your local bank or credit union to avoid the use of credit cards, to avoid 25, 30% interest rates, is a home run well beyond the 7% rate of return that you need. If you have a mortgage, well actually if you are renting a house right now, it almost always makes sense to use that $5,000 to get into the mortgage world. And again, I'm not going to go through all the math, but here's one thing to think about. You know, in addition to your annual mortgage interest deduction, at the end of your mortgage, you get $150,000 of gain tax-free. At the end of your IRA, or at the end of your 401k, you're taxed. And just that difference makes it almost always a better investment to put money into your own house. And plus it makes sense to put money into your house to pay off the mortgage faster before you put a penny into that 401k. So your house really does become your long-term piggy bank. And this same logic applies not just to your house, but to your farm. Paying off the mortgage on your farm is a far smarter use of those resources than putting money into that very risky 401k. What about self-investments that could beat 16%? Well, so I gave the example of energy efficiency. If I put $1,000 into my house rather than into my 401k, can I get 16% with energy efficiency? Duh! There's 1,000 energy efficiency techniques that probably pay closer to 20 or 25% rate of return on investment year in, year out for as long as you have them at current energy prices. And as those energy prices rise, your savings get to be greater. I could justify creating a greenhouse for $1,000 next to my house if I reduce my annual grocery bill for fresh fruits and vegetables by $160 a year. I could justify getting a great bicycle for $1,000 if I reduce my gasoline expenditures by $160 a year. Actually, we're probably spending that a week these days. I could justify putting $1,000 into a wonderful Italian espresso machine if it saves me 1 Starbucks coffee a week. I could justify putting $1,000 into my own education if it improves my earning power a year, $160. And that's, by the way, what Warren Buffett says is the single most important local investment opportunity out there. The point is that all of these things that I've just talked about are things that you control. You are your own hedge fund manager. And I think part of the local investment revolution is getting people to retake responsibility for where their money goes and how it serves themselves, their families, and their communities. I believe that we are on the precipice of the most significant shift of capital in American history. What happens when the first $1 trillion moves from Wall Street to Main Street? Well, investment advisors kind of notice, and they say, less demand for stocks on Wall Street, the prices there are dropping. We want to get our money out. And they're noticing that more people have confidence in Main Street investments, so we're going to advise our investors to move more money. So the next trillion moves, and then another, and another. This could all happen very quickly. $15 trillion to Main Street. Where I want to leave you, and where I leave my book, is with a children's story, which I think is a parable for how we need to think differently about our money. The book is called A Blue So Blue, written by Jean-Francois Dumont. And it's a story of a young boy who's obsessed with painting the color blue. And everywhere he goes, he paints this color blue. But there's one shade of blue that totally mesmerizes him. It comes to him in his dreams. And he wants to figure out, where does this shade of blue come from? So he goes on an international journey. He starts out in the Louvre, looking at the paintings of the masters. Is there any blue there? Not the right shade. He sets out on an ocean journey to see if there are patches of water with this kind of blue. Still doesn't find it. He goes to a blues bar in New Orleans. Nope, not there. And then in the desert, he encounters a blue-hooded, mysterious stranger who says to him, what you've been looking for has never been very far away. And suddenly it dawns on the boy. The blue that had mesmerized him was actually the color of blue in his mother's eyes. And I think so often we search for wealth thousands of miles away from home when that wealth is right in our backyard. That is the story of local investment. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. We do have time for 2 questions, and there's a microphone here in the back. If you have a question, I'd ask that you go to that microphone, and I'm not sure if Justin or Ariana, if somebody could turn it on, I think at the base there, until the red light comes on. There'd be a question, I don't know if you could speak maybe more to issues of risk and unaccredited and accredited.
Well, yeah, so I should say that one of the challenges about doing a talk like this is trying to combine what I often do in an 8-hour workshop into, you know, a 40-minute wind sprint. So yeah, these are very complicated issues around accredited and unaccredited investors. But I would say, so one other thing about risk that we did talk about, I mean, there's a long list that you can make of things that are riskier about local investment and things that are less risky about local investment. So I think the obvious things that are riskier about local investment is that you have a smaller pool of investors who may be more demanding if you're a business. You have a smaller pool of potential businesses to put your money into. There are more businesses that can go wrong. Things are geographically concentrated so that if the business cycle goes negative, then all of your stocks in the local portfolio will go bad. But of the many advantages to local investment, probably the single biggest one is that you can ground truth things. You have the ability to actually look at the local business. You can talk to the CEO. You can meet the employees. You can feel the good, experience the service. And that, to me, is the best assurance, the best hedge against fraud possible.
If you could come to the mic, please. No.
Can I go while she's coming?
Yes.
Hey, Mike. What about businesses, whether they're food businesses or other entrepreneurs who are maybe not ready for even a modest rate of return to local investment of 5–7%? Does the law allow, and do you know of investment schemes that allow businesses to kind of grow into being able to pay that return? So maybe in the first year it's principal only, and then you bump up the interest as the business matures. Is that something you see?
I mean, you could do anything by contract. I mean, you could have someone give you money and say, I'm not going to give you the money back. So, I mean, in a way, that's kind of Kickstarter and Indiegogo, right? So we now know that there's a full continuum of legal possibilities out there. But I think, practically speaking, the right answer to what you're talking about, and that what many food investors are looking more closely at, is royalty finance, where an investor is paid back as a percentage of revenues or a percentage of profits, so that when there are good years, there's lots of payback. When there are poor years, the entrepreneur is good and doesn't have to pay it back. But yeah, you can play with all of these things to get the formula right for the right business.
One more question.
On the
Directed IRA.
yes, thank you. You mentioned you can't invest in your own home. Can you invest in your own business? And
Generally, no. But if your business is like a partnership where you have a minority share, you may be able to invest. And there's fine print that sort of gives you do's and don'ts about what you can do.
And where do you get good information on all that fine print? Do you have a good source for that?
There are a couple of PDFs circulating on the web about self-directed IRAs. If you write to me, so there's my email address, shuman@igc.org, I will send those to you.